We've had a bit of time to digest the California streaming event by Apple, which was on at 3 a.m. yesterday in Sydney. Yes, I did get up to watch it. No regrets at all. And these are my thoughts on the major products that Apple announced during that event. Hi, I'm Derek from Try and Byte. There was quite a lot to digest from this event. There were a lot of product announcements. As per usual with Apple's keynotes, the production value was really high. I really liked a lot of the transitions that they had. And there seemed to be a lot of drone footage this time as well. Apple talked about quite a lot in this event. The pacing of it seemed to be quite fast. Overall, I think the announcements were very in line with the MO of Apple these days. That means that it's just a lot of iterative improvements and refinements to their very mature product lines. So first, let's talk about some of the more minor product updates. The first was the update to the iPad mini, which was probably the least expected product to be announced in this keynote, which also made it the most intriguing product that was announced during this keynote. And overall, I think it's a great improvement. The iPad mini basically now joins the cool kids club of the iPad line. This means it has the design language of the current iPad Pro and iPad Air. Also the removal of the home button. So the Touch ID is now on the power button at the top. And it also has Apple Pencil 2 support and USB-C. They've also added the new A15 processor, and I expect Apple to sell this same iPad for the next few years. I say this because with iPad mini updates in the past, Apple has just given it a refresh, like new processor and things, and just left it for a few years. From memory, I think the 5th generation iPad mini, which was the last one, was last updated in March 2019. And the last update before that was September 2015. So I expect this current generation of iPad mini to be around for a few years. The next minor hardware update to me was the Apple Watch Series 7. The Apple Watch itself basically looks the same, except now it has a bigger display, which looks like it curves around the edges of the screen, or at least has that effect that they showed in the video. And it has much faster charging. So for sleep tracking, for instance, Apple says that 8 minutes of charging equates to 8 hours of sleep tracking, which is really good. There are also some new colors and things, but overall, compared to what was rumored to change, it ended up being a pretty minor looking update to me. Now we get to the fun part of the keynote, which was the iPhone 13, 13 mini, 13 Pro, and 13 Pro Max. So with the iPhone 13 and 13 mini, I'd say the improvements are mostly on the inside of the phone. So the updated processor, which was the A15, smaller notch, brighter display, bigger battery, and bigger camera sensors on the main wide camera. With the 13 Pro and the 13 Pro Max, the improvements are quite similar. So it has the smaller notch as well, the new processor but with an extra graphics core, bigger battery, a brighter display, and a larger wide camera sensor again. And then on the 13 Pro and Pro Max, there's also a couple of extra sweeteners like Pro Motion display, so high refresh rate, giving you that really smooth scrolling experience similar to what you get on an iPad Pro. It also will have the ability to shoot ProRes video, which means that you'll get higher quality recordings, a bit less compression, and native support in Final Cut Pro. And the ultra wide camera has also added a macro mode, allowing you to focus on objects 2 centimeters away. Just as a side note, this is the first time that I discovered that the ultra wide camera on the iPhone 12 Pro Max that I use doesn't actually have autofocus. It's a fixed focus lens. So to achieve the macro mode on the ultra wide camera, Apple actually had to add autofocus to it. The things you know, right? Personally, I don't really mind that Apple didn't really change that much of the external design for the sake of changing the external design. I think the phones themselves still look quite modern. You could almost say that the design language of an iPhone is quite iconic. They did change some of the colors of the phones though, so you'll still be able to get your iPhone 13 street cred if that's what you're after. And now we move on to the next major part of the keynote, which was the iPhone camera software updates. First feature that probably got the most screen time was the cinematic mode. And this is a new video mode for the iPhone 13 series phones. And it basically works a little bit like a portrait mode in photos, but for video. So it uses like an artificial blur to isolate subjects within a frame while you're recording a video. And this is combined with a rack focus effect, which gradually shifts the focus between two subjects slowly. And the demos that they showed of this were actually quite convincing. Like they were able to show when someone was about to come into the frame and then put the focus on them. And the other thing they kept on showing was when people like turned around to another person, the focus would move to them. I'm not sure if they showed this during the keynote, but I found out afterwards that the depth effect that they put on the video can actually be adjusted after the video is recorded. So I imagine that it works a little bit like portrait mode, where after you take the photo, you can adjust the amount of background blur on it, but for video. And you can do this on your phone or on Final Cut Pro, which is pretty wild. And the other thing they showed, which didn't get as much screen time, was a thing called photographic styles. Photographic styles is almost like a personalized tuning of the iPhone camera to your preferences, specifically for tone and warmth. I think the one thing that they tried to stress during the keynote was that it wasn't like a filter, because the photographic styles are a bit more selectively applied, so the phone is able to determine what are the more natural elements in your frame, such as like the sky or skin tones, and keep them looking natural. Whereas with something like a filter, once you apply the filter, it's uniformly applied across the entire frame. There are some photographic style presets that are baked in from Apple, but you can then adjust these to your liking and the phone will remember your preferences. So it's almost like once you dial in your ideal look, whether you like warmer tones and things, each time you take a photo, you get your look each time, which is pretty cool. So looking at these iPhone 13 updates as a whole, and as the person that friends and family normally ask, is it worth upgrading? Here are some of my thoughts. If you're on an iPhone 11 or older, I'd say go for it, because you're going to be really happy with any of the new stuff on all of these phones, especially with things like the cameras. Like the larger sensors are such a step up from the 11 and older. If you have an iPhone 12 series of phone, I'd say probably not, unless Apple somehow has managed to snag you with a very specific use case. So if you really want things like the Pro Motion screen, or if you want ProRes video recording, or you want cinematic mode, or the photographic styles, or macro mode, I'd probably use very similar arguments for people who are asking me whether they should get an iPhone 13 or a 13 Pro. Like if you know that you need that ProMotion screen, or if you know you need macro mode, or you need ProRes video recording, then go for it. Looking at these iPhones from the perspective of a person like me, as in a person who upgrades their phone almost every year, then things get a little bit complicated. Like I consider myself to be a hobbyist photographer and to a certain extent filmmaker. So a lot of what I'm looking at is really focused on the camera side of things. So I was quite excited to see some of the camera software updates during the keynote. But now with a bit of time to think about it, some of these updates seem to be like a bit of a weird middle ground for me. The cinematic mode looks great and looks like a lot of fun, but it actually isn't in 4K, it's in 1080p. And with certain apps like Filmic Pro, you can already do things like rack focus. Granted, it is baked in, so I can't change it after the recording, but it's also a lot more accurate because it's the actual phone that's doing the focusing rather than adding an artificial blur effect. The photographic styles look pretty great too, but as a photographer, I could already shoot raw photos on my iPhone and adjust them to the way I like. And with my iPhone 12 Pro Max, I feel like I can already get the photos to look the way I want with pretty minimal tweaking anyway. Now with ProRes video, now this is something I really want to try because I want to compare it with just standard iPhone video footage. But from what I've seen, the file sizes of ProRes are pretty huge and I can hear my SSDs crying over the file sizes already. So that leaves me with 1.5 features that could stagger me to an iPhone 13 Pro, which is the ProMotion display, which I have on my iPad Pro and that I really love. Like, it bugs me when I use an iPad that doesn't have a ProMotion display. And the larger, again, imaging sensor on the iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max. Right now, I must say, it doesn't quite have the same pull on me last year as when I saw the iPhone 12 Pro Max and its larger imaging sensor, but it can change. So overall, my feelings on the keynote is that it met my expectations. I think in reality, a modern iPhone can get through at least 2 of these product cycles. So there isn't the same urgency as before to upgrade your phone every year. And I think the iterative improvements and refinements that Apple make to their phones year on year sort of reflect that reality. I don't quite see these iPhone 13s as a 12S either, because the internal improvements of them are quite significant. So maybe it's more like an iPhone 12S Plus. Don't quote me on that. My hope is that technologies like foldable displays become mature enough for Apple to consider to put into their products. But for now, I think the iPhone 13 series are the best iPhones ever made. Lastly, shout out to 12 South and Moment for having their products featured in the keynote. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the Apple keynote in general, what you think of the iPhone 13 series of phones and whether you're going to upgrade, or if you have any other questions. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again next time.